In this video, we are going to have a look at the genre or genres of writing into which this novel can be classified. There are many elements of the novel which indicate that we can hang the label of magic realism on this book, but the author, Siphiwe Gloria Ndlovu, is on record as saying that she is uncomfortable with this categorization. I'm sure that you are familiar with the term genre. The word itself is French, and in English it means kind or sort. So what we're asking in this video is, what kind of book, what sort of book is the theory of flight? The broad categories in literature are fiction, non-fiction, folk tales, drama, and poetry. As a novel, the theory of flight is fictional. This means it's a made-up story from the author's imagination. But it does, of course, have elements of non-fiction in the plot, as some events are based on real-life events, such as the downing of the Vickers Viscount aeroplane and the Bob Marley concert to celebrate the independence of the country. When defining the genre, we also have to look at other factors. When was the book written, published for the first time? The Theory of Flight was published in 2018, which makes it very recent. The novel is set in an unnamed Southern African state in the latter half of the 20th century. The author is Zimbabwean and witnessed the political changes in her country as it progressed from a British colony to independence. So she writes with the lens of a postmodern, post-colonial African woman. In literature, the various periods of writing are further subdivided into categories. Now, this infographic is used by many teachers when teaching American literature. You'll acknowledge that historical events and political changes must influence writers, that books act as a window into a particular time. The Theory of Flight is postmodern, but it deals with issues of colonialism, realism, and magical realism. It's not a novel that can be neatly categorized. So as you've been hearing from me, some critics have classified the Theory of Flight as an example of magic realism. And that very term sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it? So what is magic realism? Well, let's start with the second word, realism. By the 19th century, writers and readers were tired of the works of the romantic authors, and that's romantic with a capital R. I'm not referring to love stories here. Authors who portrayed the world in a somewhat unrealistic, romanticized manner. The novels of Edgar Allan Poe and Herman Melville are examples of this kind of writing. Authors of realism wish to portray the challenges faced by characters who are just like you and me. They write their impressions of the lived experience. Examples of this kind of writing would be the novels of Mark Twain and Leo Tolstoy. And this quote by Tolstoy really does suit the plot of the Theory of Flight. In the Theory of Flight, a man does go on a journey, in fact quite a few men, and strangers do come to town. So realism is a genre of writing in which the descriptions of the lives of ordinary folk highlight the social issues of the day. Understanding the concept of realism in writing isn't too difficult. But what then is magic realism? And how can magic be realistic? And how can realistic things be magical? If you think this is too difficult, think again. You've been training for this since childhood. You had no problem believing the shenanigans of Tom and Jerry, and you were able to cheer on Roadrunner as he escaped the clutches of Wile E. Coyote on Looney Tunes. And you were quite happy to accept that there was a pineapple at the bottom of the ocean in which a sponge lived and entertained his friends. The theory of flight should be a much easier sell than these cartoon stories. According to my well-thumbed Oxford Companion to English Literature, the term magic realism was first coined in the 1920s to describe tendencies in the writings of some German authors. In 1943, an exhibition was hosted at the New York Museum of Modern Art, featuring the work of American realists and magic realists. It was the first time that an attempt was made to describe this type of writing. In the 1960s, a number of South American authors were experimenting with this writing style, and the genre became very popular there, usually in Spanish. It was only in the 1970s and 80s that this genre became well established in British or English fiction. One of the most famous examples of a novel written in this genre is Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude. The author is on record as saying that he wrote about the world as he saw it, that he wasn't embellishing it. In this novel, such magical elements as ghosts are seamlessly worked into the ordinary world of the plot, as well as improbable details like a rain that falls for almost 5 years. Another example of magical realism is one of my favorite novels, Isabel Allende's The House of the Spirits. A critic writes that the South American world of the novel is recognizable to a greater or lesser degree, but that strange magical things do occur. Both the theory of flight and the House of the Spirits are rooted in the political turmoil of struggling democracies. The authors use fantastical and improbable plot devices and events to expand the novels, making them generalized cautionary tales applicable to many other situations. From a British or English language perspective, one of the most noteworthy novels in this genre is Salman Rushdie's novel Midnight Children. Indian-born Rushdie was recently in the news when he was attacked by a knife-wielding assailant at a book reading in New York. He lost an eye in the attack as well as the use of an arm. Go and do some research about the background to this attack and think about why people sometimes feel threatened by the printed word. More recent novels in the genre are Joanne Harris's Chocolat, Erin Morgenstern's The Night Circus, and Patrick Ness's A Monster Calls. If you think you'd like the genre, then I recommend that you start with one of these novels. If you're interested in exploring this genre, but you don't fancy reading a novel, then why not start with one of these films? My favorite is Beasts of the Southern Wild, but the best example must be the award-winning Guillermo del Toro's 2006 movie, Pan's Labyrinth. So what do all these books and films have in common? Well, firstly, a very strong narrative drive. The recognizably realistic mingles with the unexpected and the inexplicable. In other words, the plot is grounded in a world that is recognizable to a greater or lesser degree, but in which magical, fantastical, or otherwise improbable things occur. There are elements of dream, of fairy stories, mythology, combined with the everyday, often in a mosaic or kaleidoscopic pattern of refraction and recurrence. Now, this simply means that the story consists of fragments, bits and pieces that come together to create a colorful whole. With magic realism, the magic becomes part of everyday reality. For the characters, there's nothing surprising at all about it. In the theory of flight, it's quite feasible that Jeannie arrives on Beaufort Farm as a golden egg. And when we learn of something precious, a gemstone heart is not an outlandish item. And when Jeannie takes flight on her silver wings, we accept that this is both a logical and satisfying ending of the story. So what do we see that is magically realistic in the theory of flight? Well, firstly, the characters are all very ordinary folk. Time does not seem to be chronological. There's a load of predictions and foreshadowing in the novel, and the magical elements are portrayed as ordinary, everyday. They're not to be questioned. The style of writing reflects the author's background in film and filmmaking. The prose is elevated. She writes beautifully, almost poetically. It's as though the grand themes and messages of the book cannot be conveyed in simple prose. She makes use of powerful symbols. The writing is allegorical, and the satire is used as political protest. Now, please take note of the difference between allegory and symbolism. Allegory is the style of writing. It's narrative, and the story is told in order to reveal a hidden meaning. Symbolism is a literary device, and there are symbols in the allegory that add meaning to the text. Some teachers will explain that magic realism is a response to colonization. Others will argue that it's a response to the rather grim world in which we live. It's up to you to interpret Siphiwe Gloria Ndlovu's writing style and choices for yourself, bearing in mind that she herself has said that she does not want her writing labeled or boxed in any particular way. It's this quote that summarizes this novel for me. The so-called magic may be the least magical thing in the story. Survival or hope may be the most remarkable, astonishing thing. Remember that this is a novel about possibility. Suspend your belief and join the author in her imaginative world. Be aware of the deliberate ambiguities in the text and ask what they bring to the story. So, sit back, suspend your belief, and enjoy the story of Jeannie, who arrives in a golden egg and takes flight on silver wings.